Scholars, welcome to another chapter. Today we're going to talk about moral panics. In other words, we're going to talk about the effects of computer-mediated communication on well-being. So to begin, let's talk a little bit about what a moral panic is. So moral panics are these sort of broad fears that society has that something is an innate threat to its values, its interests, and well-beings. And we see the moral panic these days about new technologies. Anywhere you turn, the press is having something about kids these days, or someone's talking about, well, everybody's on their phones or their computers. And there's this general sort of societal sentiment that somehow computer-mediated communication is bad. Now, there's a couple problems with this. And the first one is this idea that while everyone's looking at their screens is bad is really a bit of a sort of a straw man argument, because nobody ever looked at like newspapers and said, well, gosh, since everyone's on the train reading their newspapers, they're being antisocial and disconnected from their world, and that's bad. And so it's a little bit interesting that we have this panic about how everyone's paying attention to their phones, but not wouldn't have the same thing if everyone was just reading. The other challenge is we have a history for thousands of years about moral panics about new technologies, and smartphones and CMC tools are really just the newest among them. So before cell phones, we had fear of the television, the idiot box, the boob tube, we called it, where by bringing the television to the home, everyone would just turn off their brains, sit down, and watch the sort of colorful pictures flashing before us, and lose all ability of critical thought. In the 1970s, we had Dungeons and Dragons, this great moral fear that by people pretending to be wizards and warlocks and fight off demons, somehow we would all become Satanists, and the world would fall into hellfire and brimstone. And obviously that didn't come to pass. Even before that, we had concerns about the telephone. By bringing the telephone into the home, suddenly it would disturb the family life by having a cell phone in the kitchen or in the house. Now someone could intrude, how rude, into our home and interrupt dinner by calling in without any sort of warning or foreknotice. And we had a big societal panic in the 30s and 40s about the intrusion of the phone into the home. Prior to Martin Luther's Reformation, we had concerns about the written word altogether. Up until then, really, reading was something that was only done by the upper class and the monks. And the concern was that by everybody having the ability to read, it would give everybody the freedom of thought that would eventually lead to the world's destruction, which obviously didn't happen. And so when we look at the current moral panic about the effects that cell phones and smart devices are having, and CMC tools in general are having on media, every time I hear about this, the first thing I tell people is it's just the latest iteration of moral panics that have been happening for literally 1,500 years. There's nothing innately sort of new about this. And so when I hear people ask, what's the effect of CMC on well-being, I say, well, even the reason that you're asking this is probably skewed. But beyond that, there's this broader question of like, is CMC bad for us? And I understand why people ask that, but it's not really the right question to ask. And it's sort of a well-informed but dumb question. And it's that for a couple different reasons. The short answer to this question, of course, and we can quote Meghan Trainor and Amy Winehouse and Nancy Reagan and say, no, it's just not. That's the end. That was a short lecture. Everybody go home. But then people say, well, why not? I mean, it's got to be more than that. And I've been in groups where people want to fight me and say, okay, well, what's so bad about it? What's going on? So let's talk about it more. The first reason this is sort of a informed, ignorant question is that often people will say, well, look at all the things that are happening as we use social media more or mediation tools more. And I always remind them correlation does not equal causation. Just because two things happen at similar rates does not mean they're innately tethered together and one is causing the other. And so on the graph that you see here, this plots over the course of years the length of the winning word in the National Spelling Bee and the number of people killed by venomous spiders that year. And if you look at these two, loosely they run together, right? These are highly correlated, they associate. And yet no one is out there trying to say that the Scripps National Spelling Bee is causing venomous spiders to bite people, nor the number of people being bitten by venomous spiders is somehow affecting that year's winning word. We would call these spurious correlations, things that, the math lines up. Yeah, okay, that seems to associate because you look at the pictures and go, yeah, those trends move together, but there's actually nothing there, or maybe a third thing affecting it. And so when people say, oh, well, social media must be causing autism to increase, no, it must not be. We see increases in autism, but the likely cause of that is just better and more frequent diagnoses of it. And that just happens to be paralleling the rise in CMC tools and social media and their ilk. And just because both of those are climbing together does not mean that one is causing the other. And so this idea that social media or CMC tools are bad for us, often the thing that people are leaning on is they say, well, look at the increased incidence of this, and that parallels the rise in social media, and that's just a correlation, not causal argument. And so there's the problem underlying it as well. Now, that said, even if we go into the sort of more causal or at least more strongly correlational data, the data show that there's not a strong correlation, or at least not a meaningful correlation. And so Orban and Problisky did a meta-analysis. This is where they took over 200 individual scientific articles, and each one looked at relationships between well-being and something or some things. And rather than analyzing one study, and any study has its limitations, it's limited to this particular context or type of population or et cetera, meta-analyses allow us to look across multiple studies and draw broader and more confident findings as a result. And this meta-analysis tried to look at what are the effects of various behaviors on, or what are the associations of various behaviors on well-being. And they found a lot of things. And before we get into the use of media, the use of communication technologies, I want to look at some of the other things that have these strong associations. And so across these hundreds of studies, what was really predictive of well-being? And again, it's not necessarily to say all of these are causal, but they really strongly correlated. So what we see here are what's called beta weights or effect sizes, and larger numbers indicate larger effects, or larger proportion of the variance can be accounted for by this input. And so positive things, as this goes up, so too does well-being. Negative beta weights means as this thing goes up, well-being goes down. And so we see here that being bullied, unsurprisingly, has a very large effect and negative effect, negative 0.21. And so if you're being beaten up or picked on or called names or having your lunch money stolen, obviously you're not doing as well. Being tall, WNBA players out there seem to be doing pretty better. So being tall has a positive association of 0.08. Riding a bicycle, 0.08. Sleeping well, a good night's sleep, getting your 6 to 8 hours and getting some good REM sleep in, 0.07. Wearing glasses has a negative effect. So those wearing glasses tend to be sort of engaged in less well-being. And again, some of these are simply correlative. Some of them may be causal. But whether or not it's, well, you rode a bike and therefore you were engaged in more physical activity and felt better, or you're feeling better and so you're more willing to ride a bicycle. Again, these don't necessarily demonstrate that causality, but what I want you to really pay attention to here is the effect sizes. Because ultimately what this meta-analysis was trying to understand was, what's the overall effect of media use on well-being? And they did find a significant effect, and it was negative, but of 0.04. So the effect of just using some media technology was actually smaller than being left-handed, wearing glasses, certainly being bullied. And so the second reason I say, well, what's the relationship between CMC use and well-being? And I say there is none, is because for all the people that say, well, social media are making our kids' life worse, and let's deal with those. Statistically, empirically, what we find is we'd actually be much better off getting people to ride bikes or stop bullying than just worried about general media use. And so not only is correlation not causation, even in the correlation, so many other things are more strongly correlated and predictive of our well-being. And so it's probably not focusing on the right thing. So all this is to say broadly is, what's the effect of our CMC use on our well-being? Is there is none. Part of the reason that answer is just there is none is because it's a very techno-deterministic question. And the assumption there is that by virtue of the medium existing, it's going to have some sort of effect. And so in the comic above, we see this is a sort of political cartoon or opinion column you'll see often run in papers, that as our media use gets sort of more savvy, we get up to this mass publication thing where here's a distinguished gentleman reading a book, and then we get more and more digital and people sort of devolve and become dumber. And this is the idea that because this technology exists, this is the effect that it has. And so do CMC channels, are they good for us? It's kind of a techno-deterministic question. And in some ways, we're just going to reject that because the technologies aren't good or bad. Instead, it's what we do with them. And so what does matter? It's not merely using the technologies, it's what you're doing with those technologies. From the social deterministic answer, we can see that the things you're doing with the mediated channels are likely going to have an effect. And so if you're using the channels to talk with grandparents through Skype or Zoom, that's probably going to have a good effect on you, good family bonds. If you're using it to ask and answer questions and get information, that can be very good for your well-being. The Kickstarter logo, if you're using it to start up a business or get an idea off the ground, this is a good thing. And so it's not innate use, but it's rather what you're doing with it that's really going to determine whether or not the use of CMC is going to have this positive or negative effect on you or outcomes on you. And so let's talk a little bit about that. What are the good things you can do, or what are the things you can do that are sort of good communication online to have sort of some positive pro-social, pro-health outcomes? One of the first of these is social support, and this is something that comes out of the interpersonal literature. Broadly, social support is the verbal and nonverbal behaviors taken to help someone in need of aid. And typically when we talk about social support, we talk about this broadly. There's a lot of different typologies that try to understand different nuances and dimensions of this. The typology that I often fall back onto and we'll talk about today is from Catriona and Sir, and breaks down to 4 different types of support. The first of which is emotional support. Most of the time when people say social support, this is what they mean, the sense of caring or understanding or empathy provided by others, sense of connection perhaps. So when someone sends you a TikTok with a happy birthday video or something, that's providing emotional support, showing they're thinking of you and they care. Having texting with somebody or just interacting with someone, using social media to maintain networks, all that's emotional support. Showing meeting connection needs, showing involvement, showing network connectivity, all that's providing emotional support. Even something as simple as people liking or thumbs upping or plussing content that you post on social media, that can provide social support, validating and affirming you and making you feel appreciated. When you post, grandma died today, and people send a bunch of hearts, which you sort of presume is a sign of empathy and understanding, it gives you that emotional support to help cope with the loss of grandma. Second type of social support is esteem support. This is more with the sort of self-esteem. Am I a good person? Rather than do I feel good? It's am I good? Am I worthy and worthwhile? We see esteem of support provided and manifest a lot of ways through CMC tools. One of the ways I often like to look at this and talk about it is through fit checks. This is where in the morning an individual gets up, puts on their outfit, hence the name. First thing, they put on the outfit, they take a picture of themselves, they post it to their social platform, and then they go about their morning. They eat breakfast, they get their homework together, put their bag together, and just before they go out the door, they check that post again. In the intervening time, people have then commented on it or thumbs up or hearted or favorited or whatever, or not. And individuals will use that feedback as esteem support. Did I put together a good outfit? Does my outfit work? And if they get enough support or support from the right people, they say, okay, this is a good outfit. I've done well composing myself, and they put themselves out the door. If they don't get enough of that feedback or don't get it from key people, they may say, oh, my outfit today doesn't work. I tried and failed. And they'll go in and change their outfit really quick and then go to work in the other outfit. That becomes a form of esteem support. Other way we see this professionally is if you're ever wondering, am I good at something? You go to your LinkedIn page and see other people have endorsed you for certain skills. And so this is not you saying I'm good at writing, but rather other people have come onto your professional network site and said, why, yes, they're good at resume writing, copywriting, writing, creative writing. And this can help bolster your sense of worth and quality and effectiveness in your writing skills, all forms of esteem support. Third dimension of support is informational support, getting advice or knowledge. So we see this often, for example, for college students, when there's a course offered by multiple professors or faculty, who should I take research methods with? Which faculty gives the best experience? You're looking for advice from peers. And so Rate My Professor then will give you informational support to find out which faculty to take it with. More broadly, things like the college subreddit Students can come on and ask, is it expected for someone to fail a class in their first year? If you go to your academic advisor and say, is it normal? They're probably not going to say, oh yeah, everyone gets a couple Fs, because there's some sort of self-presentation about that, and face and identity maintenance for the school. They don't want to say, well, of course people fail. But the fact is, a lot of students really struggle in their first, particularly semester of college, because the standards have changed, and the sort of average distribution of student intelligence and skills has increased relative to high school. And so it can be really challenging. And so asking the college subreddit for information about, is this normal, can get a much broader and sometimes more honest answer than something like just asking an advisor. In the professional arena, we see tools like Slack or Microsoft Teams, uh, um, wikis, or enterprise social media setup to help us get information about the organization. In instances like this, you may ask in the Slack channel, hey, when is this report due? And you need that sort of information, the direct information. Or increasingly, we see things like enterprise social media or Slack channels being used not to necessarily get the answer, but to actually identify the knowledge holders, to find out who in the organization has the knowledge that you need. Who should I ask about using paid time off? Is that a question for my manager or for HR? You don't necessarily need to know the answer about the PTO request. You just need to find out even to whom to direct that. Who is the knowledge keeper? And so that can be informational support as well. And we see that increasingly used by organizations via CMC. Our last form of support is instrumental support. This is also often called tangible support as well. And when we talk about it as tangible support, it may help understand that in early theorizing about computer-mediated communication, we didn't think that CMC could help us provide tangible support. This is physically helping you do something, either through, for example, moving a couch or lending you $20. And in the early days of the internet, we didn't think we could do that, because I can't help you move a couch through a dial-up connection. I can't physically give you $20. The last 10 to 15 years or so, we've seen users create opportunities and companies create opportunities, though, for this exchange after all. And it's become much more possible. So for example, if you've ever used Venmo or PayPal or some of the transfer systems for your bank, that allows us to lend someone $20 or split a bill or pay you back for coffee or concert tickets. That's tangible support. Hey, can you lend me $20 till payday? Sure, what's your Venmo? That is CMC through their instrumental support through CMC. I can't necessarily directly help you move a couch through CMC, but I can help find someone who can. And for something like TaskRabbit, which is a service where I can hire out essentially a gopher, someone to do something for me, if I need them to go pick up my dry cleaning, saying, here's the task, who will take this on, they will then run off, get my dry cleaning, and bring it back. Doesn't necessarily make me feel better, doesn't make me feel valued. I don't need to know about the dry cleaner. All I need is someone to go do that work for me, or someone bring my friend Liz cupcakes on her birthday. And so we've seen through the proliferation of CMC tools and the way that we've adapted and accommodated them, increasingly the ability to exchange all 4 dimensions of social support: emotional, esteem, informational, and instrumental. But CMC doesn't just sort of help us feel good, it can also help us literally feel good. There's physical benefits we can get to CMC tools as well. One of the ways we can do this is through gamifying fitness. Augmented reality games like Pokemon Go or Ingress have both allowed us to use these virtual overlays in the physical corporeal world to increase the amount of physical fitness we get. Going out and walking around our quad trying to pick up the virtual Pokemon monsters in the area gets people out and walking more, and it can make it social as well. You see groups of people walking around doing the same raid together. Even more directly, it can help by gamifying interactions we have with each other. So if we can't work out together or go to the gym together, we can put a list of friends together for something like Fitbit and engage in a Fitbit challenge, where with our list of friends or group of friends above, who today has walked the most steps, walked the furthest distance, who's spent the most time exercising. We can sort of gamify that process of hanging out with others. Finally, the medical fields have had really good effect with looking at using CMC as a means of engaging patients and awareness. This has been done both through automating this information, having smart apps hooked up to things like diabetes sensors to monitor insulin levels, but also doing things like having your doctor's office text you to remind you of medication, of appointments, checking in and getting information. That direct communication with your doctor's office or service provider not only can then make you feel appreciated and valued, but remind you of medication or check in and get information about your physical well-being and actually help you do things like complying with treatments and therapies. So there are some good things that when done online result in good outcomes. By the same token, though, there are some bad things, challenges that when you're doing the things online that are not necessarily morally or socially good can result in negative outcomes as well. One of these is the nature of seeing others online. And it's not to say that seeing others is bad. You don't walk around in public and oh my eyes, there's people everywhere. But rather, when you're online, the people that you see around you are twofold. One, there are many, many more. Even if you live in a large city, a metropolis area, you can walk out and see thousands of people at a time on a social medium, on the internet. There's millions of people there that all of a sudden you have access to. The second thing about them is they're much more heterophilous than your local neighborhood. In other words, there's a lot of difference. When you see people at your school and your community, they tend to be to some degree like you, similar socioeconomic status, backgrounds, on the whole, for the most part. But again, online, you run the entire gamut and everybody from every upbringing, socioeconomic background, status, etc. That can create some problems sometimes. Let's contextualize how seeing others can create some negative impacts. First of all, by seeing others, this can lead to a lot of social comparison. Remember, online and particularly in social media, people are engaging in selective self-presentation, putting their best selves forward. And in doing so, we innately compare and contrast ourselves against others that we see. Now, we've done this forever. When you were in school and 20 years ago or 40 years ago in school, we all looked at how we dress relative to how others dress, talked about our spring break versus their spring break, and engaged in the social comparison. But again, that was constrained to the people that we knew in our school all around us. Now we can see people, even if we don't necessarily talk to them. I don't ask the popular kids or the band kids what they did over break, but if we're all following each other on Instagram, I can see what they did. And so again, there's much more volume of this comparison. In addition, we put our positive stuff online, and so when you're getting the scroll of your timeline, everything you see tends to be the good from the sort of amalgamation of your network. It's not just seeing what your friend Beth did or what your friend Frank did, but the totality of your network. And so if we think about something like spring break, no matter what you did during spring break, no matter how cool it was, it seems like there were always people doing more fun things than you. There's also some weird points of comparison. How many followers do you have? So Aaron Lee has about 1 million followers and 1 million following. You don't have 1 million followers, and yet you see Aaron doing this, and so it seems possible. And so we start wondering, gosh, am I worth it? Am I worthwhile? I don't have this many followers. Selective self-presentation leads to humble bragging, where you have this poster. Oh, people keep congratulating me on my position. How do I hide the updates? I'm still getting over 600 messages. This is the type of content, the sort of overly positive, overly easy to negatively compare yourself against information we see online. The second thing, we'll go back to spring break here, this idea of fear of missing out. Again, spring break rolls along, sort of pre-social media. You knew people were going off and doing things. In the age of social media, though, you now see it. And so when your friends are down in Cabo for their spring break, you see those pictures. And even if you're having a lovely spring break yourself, maybe you're at home, maybe you're in Burlington, Vermont, wherever, it just never looks as good, not maybe just as the one picture in Cabo, but of all the dozens of your friends and the many experiences they're having. Now, there's a notable exception to this, which I always just find fascinating, and that's study abroad experiences. Because so often when you look at your network and you see all the things all the things your other friends are doing and not you, it often leads to this fear of missing out. The place that seems to be robust and resilient against that is spring break. So if you're spending the semester in Taiwan, for example, all the other things your friends are doing don't seem as cool because every moment you're in Taiwan is cool. Everything you're doing there is cool. Versus just, oh, I did something, one moment of good today. That can get sort of outweighed by the FOMO. When you're immersed in something very cool, that does seem to be the one place we can resist some of this FOMO negative self-assessment results. Third place we have this problem of seeing others is increasingly through body images, through the amount of filters and editing that goes in online pictures. Again, since we put our best self forward, the self that you see online is usually highly curated. People have picked from amongst multiple photos they've taken to get the one that's the most flattering. Even beyond that, a lot of individuals or the programs they're uploading it to will use filters to edit it. This is where you will get things like the reality Instagram reality subreddit, where people sort of post side by side photos of this is the person's untouched photo, and here's one that's been edited or altered. So you get things like the Kardashians and the Jenners that whichever one this is, it's the same person, but in one photo we see again lighting is better, more professionally done, probably some touching up, maybe some photoshopping being done. But when the photos that you're seeing online are more akin to the highly touched up, highly edited one, that can lead you to have very negative self-images. When everybody online looks sort of fantastic and gorgeous and handsome and strong and putting that best self forward, that can lead you to some real self-critique, often to very negative effect of your own perceptions of your body. Other bad things we can see online. Remember how we talked about bullying has a really negative effect on well-being? Hey, guess what? It happens online as well. Cyberbullying is bullying that happens online. And so again, bullying is not necessarily new, but there are some differences for cyberbullying online. One of the foremost of these is the fact that bullying, when it happens at school, is never good, but at least it's sort of bounded by the school day. You may get bullied on the bus, bullied at school, bullied on the bus home, but once you're home, the bully can't shove you in a locker in your own house. Or even if the bully is at their house saying bad things about you, you don't have to listen. Online, and if we recall back to our definition of social media where the channels are persistent, messages posted and discussions can go online even outside of school and can be shared and repeated and maintained and searched online all the time. And so it really sort of takes the bullying that's happening face to face. And even if it's not as physical, can make it much more mentally damaging because it's being perpetuated throughout the day and it's sort of inescapable. There are also a couple of new ways we've seen bullying manifest online. Both of these terms come from the gaming world: doxing and swatting. Doxing is this idea of finding someone who is anonymous or pseudonymous online and providing others their personal identifying information, usually to be used for negative outcomes. So if I don't like the fact that I keep losing to an online game, I find your name and your address and maybe your social security number and a credit card number or something and post it online, so that it's a threatening thing to suddenly have yourself publicly outed like this, and now people know where to find you. And then second of all, if people have the right information, if, for example, if you've been doxxed with your credit card information, others can start filing false credit charges to that card or sending things to your house. It's intimidating and a real problem. An even further manifestation of this is the idea of swatting. This does not refer to like cat-like batting, but rather the SWAT team, the police SWAT response unit. In swatting, if someone will get your name and personal information and then call into the local police a false report that's going to require a large, heavy-handed police response: bomb threat, terrorist situation, hostage situation, threat of self or other harm. And so by calling up and saying, well, I'm playing on this game online, and this guy I'm playing with, Timmy, he lives at 123 Sunset Drive in Morristown, New Jersey, and he's just threatened to blow up the school. Well, suddenly the SWAT team kicks down Timmy's door, terrifies Timmy, scares the bejesus out of him, and potentially much worse, because anytime some SWAT team is going in under these charged situations, even worse can happen than just destruction of property. And so we've seen swatting go from doxing and gaming going from both just the gaming world into things like judges and legislatures when passing laws or enforcing laws that are not perceived as popular by certain parts of the public, to have that information put online and all of a sudden make their lives very, very unsafe and possibly endangered. So we've talked about the good, we've talked about the bad. I want to take one last minute here and talk about the misunderstood. What do we kind of not get right about CMC and well-being? The first of these is addiction. We hear the term social media addiction or internet addiction bandied about. And the reason I say it's misunderstood is because it's just not a thing. To say it's an addiction, clinically, the American Psychiatric Association has a diagnostic manual that says, okay, if you're showing X and Y symptoms, you have this disorder. The DSM does not acknowledge or address or identify social media or internet addiction as an actual thing. And so anybody says, oh yeah, they're addicted to social media, please know that's just sort of a lay understanding and address of someone's behavior and not actually a clinical diagnosis. No one anywhere in the world has ever been actually diagnosed with social media addiction or smartphone addiction, because it just doesn't exist. It's a misuse of that term. The probably more accurate term that doesn't require the DSM-5 to diagnose is the idea of problematic use. And this is the idea that the thing you're doing tends to be habitual, something that you lack the executive self-function to stop yourself or control yourself from doing, and critically has a negative outcome to it. And so we could talk about being addicted to breathing or having problematic use of breathing because it's habitual and you can't stop yourself from doing it. But it doesn't have that thing where the outcome is negative. Stopping breathing is negative. The act of breathing is positive. So when we talk about problematic use, this could be gambling where you're not quite addicted to it, but you're involved in it too much and can't stop. This is when we talk about problematic use. This may be closer to what we mean when we say social media addiction. Because again, since there's no clinical diagnosis to this, no one's addicted to it, but we absolutely have cases of problematic use of smartphones, smart devices, social media. When you're driving and on your phone, distracted driving leads to increasing number of accidents and traffic fatalities each year. If you can't engage in the executive function to not check your notifications while driving, you're distracted, if you're out of your lane, not looking for pedestrians, that's absolutely a negative outcome of your social media use. Not from the nature of using it, but from your lack of self-control to not be checking your texts while driving. The second part of misunderstood here is something that actually dates from the early 1990s, and it's something that's referred to as the internet paradox. And to talk about the internet paradox, we've got to talk about Toronto. So in the 70s and 80s, as the internet was growing, again, it was primarily used by the military and academics. In the 1980s, it found its way into organizations. In the early 1990s, we started to see the reverberation of it probably entering the home. And researchers wanted to figure out what's going to happen. What's the effect of having internet access in your home? And so some researchers set up a study in this town just outside of Toronto, Ontario, that they referred to as Netville. There was a new planned community being built, and the researchers got some money together to have every home be wired for internet connectivity and then give every resident a computer. So no longer was it sort of the self-selection of who's bought a computer and has the wherewithal, but everybody just has internet access. So in the early 1990s, the Smartville study ran, and one of its infamous findings was that people in the Smartville community spent time online or spent time using the internet and didn't talk to their neighbors as much. And they said, aha, here's the internet paradox. By giving people a communication tool, they communicate less. This seems like a real paradox. What happened? Interestingly enough, researchers also felt like that seemed a little too simplistic, and they went back years later and reanalyzed. What they found out was it didn't reduce communication, it just shifted. It wasn't that people weren't communicating. It's just rather than walking around the neighborhood and talking with neighbors, people were in their basements, dens, living rooms, offices, on the computer, talking with other people online. It was a shift in where we communicated, not a overall reduction in how we communicated. We see the same phenomenon today. Sherry Turkle has a book, Together Alone, where we sometimes lament that in a public space, everyone's together and yet alone because we're isolated, we're on our devices. And yet it's not that we're alone. It's just rather than talking with the person next to us, we're talking with someone on the other end of our device or our connection, or social media platform. So it's not that the use of these smart technologies is reducing our overall communication. It's just shifting it from those who were physically co-present with to people that we're interacting with online. The last part of the misunderstood is probably the one that's most problematic for me, which is the relationship between video games and violence. If you look at a lot of news stories, especially out of mass violence, we see a lot of people trying to attribute violence to playing video games. And the most recent example of this is a headline of the brief article here. Luigi Mangione, who was arrested and charged with the murder and the shooting death of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, once belonged to a group of Ivy League gamers who played Assassins. A member of the group told NBC News. In the game called Among Us. And so, in a bit of journalistic malfeasance, what you see here is the mass media trying to equate playing Among Us with, of course, this person became a shooter. They were playing violent video games in which they played assassins. If you're not familiar, Among Us is a game that got a lot of popularity and a lot of users during the COVID pandemic, in which multiple players played this social game, taking on these little avatars of sort of workers at a space station, and one or two of them got assigned to be the role of this assassin, and was trying to get everyone and throw them out of airlocks before they could accomplish their mission. It gave rise to the word sus. Millions of people played this game. And so to suddenly say, well, this person, of course, he was a shooter because he was playing Among Us. It's just like saying Timothy McVeigh, who bombed Oklahoma City, played Tetris. The through line between connecting those is so shady that it just is poor journalism. And yet we see this. What is the cause of this sort of this desire? What's more importantly, what's the actual relationship between video games and violence? To understand this question, we first got to answer what's violence. Let's define it. And the problem is no one really ever takes the time to define violence. What makes a violent video game, for example? Is it the act of trying to physically assault one another and punch each other? Because I don't think a lot of people have tried to make the claim that punch out makes people more violent. What about large groups of individuals trying to inflict physical harm on the other? People don't seem to have this innate sense that Madden or NFL Blitz are violent video games. What about a plumber who assaults turtles on their way to the work in the morning? Mario should be an incredibly violent game where all you're doing is jumping on turtles and mushrooms, and yet no one ever calls it as such. Even Tetris, where the game is to destroy everything to get a clear screen. So one problem is by looking at violent video games, we have a really poor sense of even what a violent video game is. A lot of video games have some component of violence understood broadly. The thing is, again, through meta-analyses, and most of these have, several of these have been done, and all of them conclusively come up with there's no direct link between playing video games and violence. Sherry's 2007 was an early one and a very conclusive one, and I have yet to see an update since that doesn't confirm that there's no relationship between playing video games and violence. Part of this is because the causal effect of this just doesn't follow. To say, well, this person played video games and therefore they were violent doesn't follow at all, because if playing Among Us made this person violent, then why was he the only of the millions of people who played Among Us to become a shooter? By the same way that people have held up over the years everything from Mortal Kombat to Doom as these violent video games, and they do, they're very gory and blood-ridden, and you're trying to shoot people and hurt people. But millions of people have played these. You played these, I played these, and none of us are mass murderers. And so again, we have this association, not causation problem. Where we do see a challenge to video games, when we do see an association these days, is in multiplayer games, but critically, it's not in the gameplay. Rather, it's in the interactions that occur in those games. Because we do see a new trend in groups, whether it's a political ideology or a societal ideology, using video games to identify and radicalize particularly young gamers, kids, teens, and tweens. And so what they'll do is these groups, individuals will go in and start playing, whether it's Rocket League or Fortnite or Minecraft or whatever, and they'll start by just sort of trolling. They'll throw out a net, to use a fishing analogy, throw out a net or throw out a line, and just sort of make statements of, gosh, wouldn't it be great if X and Y happened? And just see sort of who bites, who's interested in this idea, who wants to talk about it. Once they find a couple people that want to talk about it and seem open to this idea, or at least open to the discussion, then we can start finding, oh, you seem interesting, let's play again, create some relationships, start to sort of ferment and lead these ideas towards shaping that individual's identity, no longer around being a Fortnite player, but also sharing this radicalized identity. Once they see themselves as part of this community, that's where we can pull them from the game into the offline world. Come with us to this rally, this march, this petition, and that's what then leads us to that radicalization. So it's not to say that everybody playing Fortnite is going to get radicalized by ISIS, but we do see extremist groups, again, from ideological to political to governmental. We see a lot of problems with the interaction that's occurring in these games, the sort of nature of them being some public agora where people can just come together and talk and chat broadly. That can lead to the negative outcomes, not of gaming, but of the game as a social forum. So this brings us to the end today. But that said, I don't want you to stop thinking just because we're at the end of it. So a couple questions to sort of keep you going. First of all, so we start off by saying the questions, the question that CMC tools are good and bad for us is the wrong question. So what's the smart question? How would you rephrase that to actually address what matters? Second, think about what channels you use. What channels during the day do you use, whether they be social media platforms, email, texting, whatever. How do those different channels allow you to access different types or dimensions of social support differently? Last, imagine you're sitting around a dinner table, a family conversation, or talking to someone on the bus, and they say, of course, video games make people more violent. What would you say about that? How do you address that? How do we break that myth? Scholars, thank you so much for sticking with me through moral panics and effect on well-being. Hope you had a great time as I have, and we'll see you next time.